Yesterday, Apple announced the brand new MacBook Pro 16. Promises to be faster, stronger, more ports than last year, and a whole host of new upgrades. So, is it any good and worth pre-ordering? Let's find out. What's up, everyone? I'm the Everyday Dad, and if I can figure it out, you can figure it out. So I'm very excited about the brand new MacBook Pros. I'm a big user of MacBook Pros. I've been using them for a lot of years now as my only computers. Recently with the M1s, though, I've switched over to the MacBook Air and the Mac Mini, but I think with this new processor generation that the scales are probably going to start tipping back to me using the MacBook Pro 14 and the MacBook Pro 16. We made a video yesterday about the MacBook Pro 14, but today it's time for the MacBook Pro 16. How many times am I going to mess that up as we make this video? I want you to leave me a comment guessing how many times I've messed that up. I assume it's going to be quite a lot. Now, there's not a lot of a difference between the MacBook Pro 16 and the MacBook Pro 14, so we're going to go through this a little bit faster than we did yesterday, because if you've seen yesterday's video, there's only a few key points that I want to cover between the differences of the two. But if you haven't seen anything about the brand new MacBook Pro 16, we will make sure to cover everything. So a lot of the new benefits of the MacBook Pro 16 are coming from the processor. So this MacBook Pro 13 has the M1 processor in it, which is that 8-core processor we've been talking about for the last year. It's got 4 performance cores, 4 high-efficiency cores. Well, the new MacBooks will have the M1 Pro and the M1 Max processors inside of them. Now, those also come in an 8-core configuration, but they also come in a 10-core configuration, which will be 8, I had to count, right? 8 power cores and then 2 high efficiency cores. So we should be seeing some really fast performance out of here. Also, the screens will be upgraded to be liquid Retina XDR displays like we see in Apple's Pro XDR panel. That's that super expensive monitor that I could never purchase because I would never afford something like that. So yeah, that's also coming to the MacBook Pro 14 and the MacBook Pro 16. You can see here, it's just the numbers that they're putting up on here are wild. And honestly, if we had not seen what came out of the MacBook Air, the MacBook Pro, and the Mac Mini from last year, probably be pretty hard to take this. It'd be hard to say, Apple, okay, you're saying these crazy numbers. Should we actually believe you in this? And I do believe them. We have not yet had a chance to put these up against benchmarks or test them out yet, but they were pretty solidly close last year. I have no doubts that they're telling us the truth now. So you can see we're getting up to 13 times faster graphics performance, 3.7 times CPU performance. And one of the things that I'm most excited about are the return of physical ports to the MacBooks. One of the things that I've been complaining about MacBooks since, 2016, 2017? Whenever they moved from the 2015 is they started giving all USB-C and all Thunderbolt. And yes, Thunderbolt is incredibly versatile. I don't like always having to use it. I don't like dongles. I don't like needing to bring extra things to me. And I don't like having to buy extra things to get my computer to work. I like that here we've got the SD card reader back, which the only people that care about that are photographers, videographers, and YouTubers. Most people, I get it, you don't care about the SD card slot. But for business professionals, HDMI, that's a pretty big deal for me. I do a lot of briefings and presentations, not in my studio or not in my office, so I need to plug into HDMI quite often. Having this built in, we also get MagSafe back for charging, but if you don't like proprietary ports, you can also charge via the Thunderbolt. Now, I was going to be pretty hard on Apple this year if they brought back MagSafe, but only if they brought back MagSafe and didn't let us charge other ways. So now if you don't want to use their proprietary cable, you don't need to. Okay, here's the 2 processors we were talking about. They've got the Pro and the Max, which is scary fast and scary faster. I would have called it scarier faster. Scarier fast. That's why I'm not a designer. You can see the M1 Pro can go up to a 10-core CPU, 16-core GPU. It will run 32 gigabytes of unified memory, which again was another limitation of the M1s that could only go up to 16 gigabytes of unified memory. The M1 Max 10-core CPU, 32-core GPU, 64 gigabytes of unified memory. Now, regular people, I'm a power user and I am not getting any of that because that's way too wild for me. In essence, like we said in yesterday's video, they're basically taking the M1 and expanding it. Like they're building on that SoC to make it even more better. We talked about this, scary fast for the performance. I do think the performance is going to be wild for both sets of processors. I've been nothing but impressed with the M1. Like the M1, my Mac Mini, which has been my primary computer for the last year, is faster than the iMac Pro that I used to use. That iMac Pro was it was a $4,500 or $5,000 computer that I had on loan. I couldn't even afford it. I had to do a business lease. But that Mac Mini, which cost like $1,000, blows that thing out of the water. So having even more power, I can't even begin to tell you how excited I am. You can see some numbers in here. Let's not pay attention to the 14-inch. Today we'll talk about the 16-inch model, where you will see that we're going to get about a 2 times increase in CPU and GPU power over previous models. Now, one of the things I wanted to mention today that we did not talk about yesterday is it looks from here that the 16-inch model is a little less powerful, like less of an upgrade than the 14-inch model. But you got to remember, when they're doing these comparisons, they're comparing the 16-inch model against the previous 16-inch model, which did have an 8-core Intel i9 processor inside of it. And that was a very powerful machine. So being able to double that, I think that's pretty darn impressive to me. Okay, we can see from GPU performance, we'll get about a 3 times GPU increase on the 32-core GPU and a 1.7 times increase on the 16-core GPU. Again, like we mentioned, that doesn't seem like that big of an upgrade, but in reality, that MacBook, you can see here, it had a dedicated graphics card inside of it. These will not necessarily have dedicated graphics cards. They will have integrated GPUs with those 16 and 32 cores. That's kind of new. We don't really see that right now in the PC world. I just built a brand new PC that has an RTX 3080 inside of it, and it's a dedicated graphics card. These will still not have dedicated like 3080s. They'll have integrated Apple graphics, and I'm prepared to be very blown away by what Apple's able to do here. We talked about battery life. One of the things, I am a little disappointed in battery life this year, and that's not, I guess disappointed isn't the right word because it's still up to 21 hours of battery life. That's the best battery life we will have ever seen on a MacBook. But the MacBook Pro 13 has had 20 hours of battery life for the last year. And I understand you can't get around physics. Like, we're putting roughly the same battery in the computer and we're asking it to do more and more and more. Okay, so we're not going to get 30 hours of battery life because that's just the technological limitations of our day. So 21, totally usable, but I was kind of hoping to see a little more than that. The thing that's going to hold this back, and I will continue to hammer this home until we actually get this in, is the thermal efficiency. The most important part of any laptop, doesn't matter if it's a MacBook, if it's a Dell XPS, whatever it is, it's the thermal performance. You're going to start shoving in high-end components. Well, the computer, if it's not properly thermally managed, will throttle that performance, and you will literally throw money away because you will have spent all this for all this great performance. But if the computer cannot keep up thermally, it doesn't matter because the computer's not going to let itself melt into slags. It will thermally throttle. I'm not as concerned about the MacBook Pro 16 as I am about the MacBook Pro 14. As we've already seen, those Intel Core i9 chips are hot. They run hot. It doesn't matter what computer you put them in. They are very aggressive. I mean, they're powerful, but they get that power in not thermally efficient ways. And the old MacBook Pro 16, I did not have any thermal issues with that computer. So if that chassis can handle that, I assume it will be able to handle these much more power efficient and thermally cool Apple chips. I am fairly nervous about the MacBook Pro 14, but I'm excited to see what they've been able to do thermally. You can also see that their storage is now coming up to like 7.4 gigabits per second storage. That's also wild. We talked about the XDR display. It's going to be incredible. It's going to have a 1,000,000:1 contrast ratio. It's going to be able to go to 1,000 nits of brightness. But what I think is going to be really cool is the ProMotion. Now, ProMotion is a variable refresh rate technology, which we've now got on the iPhone 13 Pro, Pro Max, the iPad Pros, the M1 iPad Pros. All of those have ProMotion in them. But I think it's going to be very useful here because if you are going to be doing gaming or other tasks like that, there is a tangible actual benefit to having a faster refresh rate. It's not just I'm trying to watch movies at 120 hertz. But what ProMotion also does is it will lower that refresh rate too, thereby saving you battery life. So if you're doing what we're doing right now and we're just reading a website, ProMotion will lower it down to as low as 10 hertz, thereby saving you extra battery. That's so good. I love it on my iPhone 13 Pro Max. I'm going to love it here. This display will be built out of mini LEDs. So like we said, I'll have 1,000 nits of brightness. This MacBook Pro 13 goes up to 500 nits of brightness. Is it as bright as it can go right now? It's not even as bright as it can go right now. You're going to be able to see that wherever you're working. You're going to be able to take that computer and work anywhere. It's awesome. 1,000,000:1 contrast ratio, like we already said. This is going to be an HDR monster. If you like watching HDR movies or you release content or you are a video editor that does a lot of HDR delivery, this is going to be for you. 1 billion colors, incredible. You can see here on the 16-inch, you're going to get a 16.2-inch display. 3456 by 2234 at 254 pixels per inch. So good. We already talked about the ports. This is the most controversial point about the whole MacBook Pro, right? It's got a notch. That notch houses the brand new 1080p camera. Now, do I love notches in general? No, but they don't bother me. I can't remember the last time I was using my iPhone and I was like, there's a notch. It drives me crazy. So I am very happy though to see that we're going to get a brand new 1080p camera. I'm not going to belabor too much here, but with folks working from home a lot of virtual collaboration going on, cameras on computers now are very, very important. And it's nice to see that they're taking this serious. Gets me a notch? Oh well. I will somehow survive the day. They're talking about 3 studio quality mics. If they can get the microphones from the M1 iMac into a MacBook Pro, I will agree that they are studio. Like, those things sound incredible. We even did it here in the studio when we did the M1 iMac video. I have a dehumidifier that I'm pointing at right now. When it runs, it's very irritating, but these have very good noise cancellation and noise rejection, where we were able to record video right here with my dehumidifier like 2 feet away, and it cut out an awful lot of it. I really hope we can get that starting in the MacBook Pro 16. Spatial audio, yeah, they're going to have good audio. I'm not an audiophile to tell how good music's going to sound, but I assume that music will sound pretty good. Ooh, one of the things I did want to mention that I did not talk about yet, one of the big benefits of the M1 Pro and the M1 Max, now you will be able to have multiple displays. The M1s could only do one 6K display out of the Thunderbolt port, but now with the 16-inch M1 Max, you're going to be able to have up to 4 displays. I use just one gigantic ultra-wide display in I keep pointing back here. My home office is right through that wall, but I use one gigantic ultra-wide display. But if you are somebody that likes those with lots of monitors, you could not use the M1 Max. So it's nice to see that you will be able to start using them again. Whether this is an upgrade depends on your personal philosophy. On the Apple keyboard, I do not like the touch bar. I've never liked the touch bar. It's never been something that I've enjoyed using. I know some folks do, and I'm sorry to say that I'm not sorry to say that it's gone. If you liked it, I'm sorry for you, but I am very happy to see that we're getting all physical keys here in the future. I like how this has a little bit of a black background instead of a fully aluminum background. I think it's going to make it just look a little better, look a little more high class. And it's going to get the trackpad, which Apple has the best trackpad in the business. That's not even a question. That's just a statement of fact. So let's go to the ordering options. And which one would I recommend? Now, something I do want to say before we really start digging into the ordering options these are niche computers. The MacBook Pro 14 and the MacBook Pro 16, they're not necessarily for everybody. These are very powerful, very expensive machines. So I don't necessarily recommend them in the same way that I recommended the MacBook Pro 13 or the MacBook Air. Those were much more budget friendly and they still had a lot of power. So while these are going to be incredible, know that you need to really understand if you need this power, because it's going to be a lot and it's not going to be cheap. I mean, look, here, even at the base model of the 16-inch, we get the 10-core CPU, the 16-core GPU, 16 gigabytes of unified memory, and the 512 gigabyte solid-state drive. And that's at $24.99. That is not cheap. But I do like that this is in line with the previous version of the 16-inch MacBook Pro. So they did not charge more to get the same spec level. I like that. The mid-range option will get you the same CPU, the same GPU, same unified memory, 1 terabyte of storage instead. You'll see that it'll cost you $200 more. And then when you start moving into the Max, it gets real expensive. So the 10-core CPU, 32-core GPU, 32 gigabyte unified memory, 1 terabyte solid-state drive, that's $34.99. Oh, that hurts to read right there. That hurts to read. So let's see what kind of manipulation we can do with the specs in here. So we can go up to the 10-core CPU for $400. We can do 64 gigabytes of unified memory for another $400. We can go up to an 8 terabyte solid state drive. How much was that? For $2,400, bringing it to $6,099. And if I remember correctly, that's actually cheaper than the top of the line version with the Intel. So maybe they're able to save some money there. But what would I recommend somebody get? Well, I'd probably go with one of the base models. Unless you have a real need for rendering technology or graphical prowess, I'd probably stick with the base 10-core CPU. I would go up to 32 gigabytes of unified memory. If you are going to buy a 16-inch machine, you need the power specs. Don't go any lower than 32 gigabytes of unified memory. If you only need 16 gigabytes of unified memory, I would stick with the 14-inch model or the 13-inch MacBook Pro. Storage, I would say 512 gigabyte or 1 terabyte of storage is probably fine. I personally only ever get 1 terabyte of storage in my personal laptops, even though I have a gigantic RAID system set up with 24 terabytes. I don't really need any internal storage on my Macs. I don't use any of the internal storage on my computer anyway. So I would say if you were going to upgrade here, 1 terabyte of storage. So my overall pick for what I would get for the 16-inch MacBook Pro comes to $3,100. That's tough. That's not a cheap, but this is a tool. This is not a toy. So if you have this need for these kind of specs, well, then you already know, and you know which one you probably need to get. But if you're just like a general YouTuber, you just want the biggest laptop you can get, and you're like, Gary, what should I get? Well, this is the one that I would recommend. But what about you? Are you getting a MacBook Pro 16? What are some of the things that you are most excited about with these new laptops? Let me know in the comments below. And if you like this video and you would like to see more of my impressions on these brand new MacBook Pros, you can find my video talking about the MacBook Pro 14 by clicking right over here. Click, 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 click. Thanks for watching.